So recently we got a question from one of our listeners that you guys can also contribute to if you go to the Darkmoor Podcast Network Discord. And it was regarding the topic of play-by-post. I am using the D&D Beyond website, which has very specific rules, I think, sort of, regarding their play-by-post. There's like a whole FAQ and everything. And I just wanted to define this really quick before John takes over here, which is that a play-by-post is a campaign that takes place completely on these forums. The DM will post an initial thread, usually with the campaign description, and state what they're looking for in regards to players. Then the entire campaign takes place right in the thread. Everything your character does and says will be typed out, and you can even roll dice as a part of your reply, which is pretty cool. It's a type of game played on public forums. Sometimes it's played on Discord even. I've actually heard a lot of people do that. And in some cases, even on like Facebook Messenger or something. And the question was, what sort of experiences we have with play-by-post? And if so, if there's any advice that we have regarding the equity of voice, immersion, crafting better RP moments and such. And if we don't have experience, what sort of obstacles would we foresee running into as a player or DM of a play-by-post game? And what tips would we have to overcome those? Adam, you want to start?
So I have had some experience running a play-by-post, and it was through a Facebook group. It was through a Facebook Messenger, a whole bunch of Messenger groups branching off of that. This was when Night Owls was still trying to find its way. And I did a section, I made like a Facebook group called Night Owls Interludes, which were supposed to be small adventures or like downtime activities that the players who were playing at a game would then exchange and go inside. And like I would do a prompt of this NPC is available to talk to, and they would do that. It's not quite the same as a play-by-post. Play-by-posts have sort of a broader spectrum. But I can foresee the same problems happening that happened with this, which was, one, it became a barrier for entry, and the frequency became a barrier for entry. So I'm glad that we mentioned the equity of voice, because I had one player in particular, maybe two, that were always online and were always posting. And because they were always posting, others felt that they could not post, or they felt that they were not as immersed, and then they slowly dropped off and then just stopped posting and removed themselves from the group without saying anything, just went, this is too much, and left. I asked them why, and they said, well, this person's posting a lot and I just don't feel like I'm connected to the story anymore. And I can see that if you have people with different frequencies online, if one person is posting a lot and another person is posting very little, the person who's posting a lot has more spotlight. However, those problems that came out of those singular players kind of ruling the stage, I think can be mitigated if there is, you can set, of course, privacy. It doesn't have to be a public thing. So we did a limited group, so only certain people that I invited could be a part of it. I started creating guidelines and like terms of use, and trying to put out that there's an expectation here that if you post, you cannot get angry if someone is not posting right away, because that's not how this works. That expectation can't be there. And then we started to think about, okay, can there be post limits if there's an interaction and like a circumstantial post limit? So you can post once in this interaction, you have to wait for someone else to post before you can post again. And we had some players that assumed that if no one posted, all the other characters in this interaction were just silent. And then their characters got mad at the characters who were silent. Like, why aren't you saying anything? And I'm like, that's not the right expectation. This is completely asinine. You can't do that. So we had to reset all those expectations. When people didn't follow them, we kicked them out of the group. But then the group fizzled and died and fell away, because once we established those expectations and really found our own, all the people that probably would have enjoyed it in that format had left because of that first barrier. So if you do a play-by-post, you want to be upfront about what your expectations are, be very consistent in how they're enforced. And if someone's really talking a lot, it's okay to like send them a private message and be like, hang on, let other people respond first. And it's okay to establish those things. I could see this working as long as everybody is respectful of their post frequency and everyone is respectful of the amount of time and fluctuation that can change between play. It's just people are in different time zones. They have different internet connections. Some people have, jobs, and other people work from home. So their ability to respond to these things all fluctuate and all change. So you have to come into it with that understanding. And I think if everyone is respectful, there's a lot of opportunity there for depth and immersion. You can use different media sources. Heck, I remember writing a song for Night Owls at one point and distributing it to the players in interludes, and how much that increased the immersion. Like suddenly there was that surge of, oh man, this is so cool, and it bolstered activity. But then we had those players kind of take over and I had to boot them. So it takes a lot of, my final little point before I pass it off is, I think a play-by-post works really well if whoever's running it, the moderator, in this case, maybe even the DM is the moderator, has a lot of time and effort up front to devote to moderating it. It has to be, it has to be managed. And I think in some cases, depending on the setup, you might be managing even more than you would have done in a Roll20 scenario or in a real-time play with physical people at tables. And yet a play-by-post can also cross certain barriers that people would have in Roll20 and cameras and all that. So there are positives to it. I'm not trying to bash it, but you have to go in with rules kind of in mind so that you have a kind experience for everybody.
Yeah, I would say with play-by-post, it's definitely a style of game. And it's one that can reward patience and thoughtful responses. That would be the thing that would increase immersion, right? I'm also curious because I think one of the things with play-by-post, based on like what D&D Beyond said, how many players can play up to a play-by-post game? That's my other question, right? So if it's limited to like 4 players, part of the problem, because I remember Night Owl's interludes, right? And I just saw that I was invited. I saw what was happening and I got overwhelmed right away. I didn't even attempt to read it, right? Part of it was there was just so many people in it that it was like, how could this possibly be organized? So, if you take out the forum part, where it's like play-by-post is part of a forum, right? Or that it's public. I've actually, looking back on it, done a lot of play-by-post games, A lot of people would argue that that Geras, in a way, is a play-by-post game in that you wait for a player to post their comment, and then you make a thoughtful response, right? Now, I know we had talked about before recording that doesn't really count because there's a time frame where we all agree to sit down at a virtual table and kind of play out together. And it's not, there's more interactive elements with it than, say, just forum exchanges, which is almost pure theater of the mind, pure text. The other play-by-post games I've been a part of, it's always been either as a one-on-one or it's been, say, a small group of people. Like, I'm getting prepped for another game here coming up that'll have 7 people online. Which will be in the next podcast episode if you listen to the next podcast episode. But the idea there being, though, I have like clumps of people where I made like a clump of 4 people. It's like your characters have this theme or this experience in common. How do you resolve that, or how does this leverage going into the next story? Or I'll have. I did this with 2 players where I'm like, in the last session, your two characters, for whatever reason, seem to have some kind of connection. So we're going to foster that a little bit. We're going to invest in that dynamic by doing a short play-by-post kind of thing. And Adam is absolutely right. It's one of those things where you can't expect people to respond right away, if nothing else than internet connection, right? There's been plenty of times I've sent something, it says the person has seen it, but it might just be that their phone said that they saw it, but they really have another tab. You can't rely on the normal speed of interaction, which also means now you have the time to craft thoughtful responses. So it's a sword that cuts both ways. But I found that for me, because I'm more of a writer than an actor, play by post is more immersive than at the table play, and it's more energizing or more energetically efficient than at the table play, as long as everyone's respecting the rules and you're keeping a reasonable amount of players kind of in the realm of everything,
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.